Hello, and welcome to our webinar today at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I'm the Chief Economist here at the Foundation, and we're just pleased that you joined us here today about an important topic that many of you face every year within your budgeting, really every month in many cases, whether you are a business owner or whether you're a family, you're all paying it. And in fact, even if you're renting right now, a portion of your rent is going to pay property taxes to your landlord. Okay, so we all pay for this in some capacity. So it should be at the top of each one of our minds as we move forward. And you know what? Property taxes are really high, which is probably why you've joined us here today. And so we've got two experts that are going to join us today. And and it's Austin Property Taxes, What to Watch For Now. That's the title of our webinar today. So first, I have the Honorable Ellen Troxclair with us. She is a senior fellow here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and she is also a best-selling author of her new book, Step Up. So you'll want to check that out. Thank you, Ellen, for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We also have with us James Quintero. James Quintero has been with the foundation for many years now and has done a lot of good work on local government, some at the state level as well. But that's really been where his pride and joy is now, is working on local governance, where he's been the director of the Center for Local Governance for a number of years, has worked on Think Local Liberty, has worked on some of our new campaigns that we have rolling out, and has really just been a champion of bringing down property taxes, along with Ellen. Both of these two have been just great champions of limited government and finding ways to have good government such that our tax dollars, whatever we're funding, we need to make sure that those are effective government programs. And unfortunately, that's not always the case, as many of you know. And so if you're spending more, you're going to lead to higher taxes and more of a burden on each one of us. And so I hope that today you'll learn something about the property tax system, as we're going to take a pretty high level, and then we'll dig into the weeds as us policy geeks like to do, and really take a stab at how can we move forward. There were some good lessons to learn from the last legislative session in 2019 that really, I think, set the benchmark for where we need to move going forward. And let's talk about that today. And so I'd like to start with you, James. Would you mind giving us an overview of property taxes, kind of what they are, where we're at right now at the state level, and maybe dig a little bit into to Austin's property tax system, and then we'll have some additional questions after that. And before I go to you, James, if any of you in the audience have questions, please just put those in the chat box, and I will look at those and ask those to our great participants here today. So, James, what's going on? What's up with property taxes?
Well, thank you, Dr. Ginn, for having me. Ellen, always a pleasure to be on with you.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, I have been here for a little while now. And unfortunately, during that time, we haven't yet solved the property tax problem. In fact, it's gotten worse, and I hope that we can get into just why that is and what we hope to do about it in the near future, as well as over the long term. To kind of simplify the system, there's a couple of different pieces that everybody should know about when it comes to property taxes. You have your appraisals, which of course are the values that are assigned to your home or business. And those are given out by the appraisal district, which is a separate unit of government, separate and apart from your city, your county, your school district. In addition to your appraisal value, you also have a tax rate. And once your city officials, county officials, school district officials know what values are in their community, they'll adopt a tax rate so as to bring in a certain amount of revenue. And so, appraisal values, tax rates, and revenues are three big pieces to the tax system that everybody should have a broad understanding of. Now, you're probably wondering, what the heck is this number over here?
Yes, I was.
What we did was we took a look at the average Travis County homeowner's tax bill. We wanted to see just how big it had gotten over the last 5 years or so. And according to the Travis County budget info that we were able to get, the average taxpayer in Travis County pays almost $8,500 per year. And over the last 5 years, that has actually grown by about 54%. So you can see it's a big number that is growing fast. And it's probably why a lot of people here in Travis County in particular are really interested in property taxes because it's growing really fast.
And James, is that number, you said average homeowner, is that about $300,000 to $350,000 valuation?
It's about a $300,000 valuation.
So if you have a more expensive home, your taxes are way bigger. And as you said, growing at an unsustainable rate.
Absolutely. So just 5 years ago, for example, the average Travis County homeowner was paying about $5,500 in property taxes. So in just a 5-year period, those taxes have grown by about $3,000. And I don't know about you, but I certainly don't think I received $3,000 more in services than I did 5 years ago.
No, certainly not. Yeah. And I'm sure that Vance is going to get into Senate Bill 2 and what we did last session to try to get this number to stop growing as quickly as it has been. But before we do, I want to jump in really quickly and just debunk a very common myth about appraisals and tax rates. A lot of people, when they call me to upset about their taxes, they say, well, it's because of the appraisals, right? It's because my house went up so much in valuation. And appraisals actually are not the thing that drives your actual tax bill. Regardless of what your house is worth, it is the taxing entity, the state or the city or the county that sets the rate that actually decides how much you pay in taxes. So for example, just to make it easy, 10% of say $100,000 home is $10,000, right? Yeah. But if you have a $200,000 home, you can still pay $10,000 if your tax rate is only 5%. So the percentage of the valuation is really what is driving how much you're paying out of pocket. So I just wanted to debunk that common myth. And it's really the elected officials who have the ability to set your tax rate. They are the ones that are determining how much that bill is.
And yeah. to that point, Ella, right now is a really important time because, of course, everybody just got their appraisal values and we went through the protest period. Some of that's still ongoing. But now the focus and the energy is going to shift to the taxing units themselves. They're going to gather together soon and decide what is that tax rate that we're going to adopt for the coming fiscal year. Mm-hmm. Most, which of course begins in October for most of these jurisdictions. So taxpayers need to keep an eye on their local governments because those bodies are going to soon adopt tax rates. And that's really where the discretion comes into play.
Yeah. And speaking of local government bodies, Ellen, the reason why I said the honorable was that you were on city council for a few years and had the opportunity to see kind of behind the city council here in Austin, see behind the scenes of how some of that is looked at and the spending priorities and things of that nature. What were some of the lessons that you learned that we could share with our audience?
Yeah, so I mean, rising property taxes was really the main reason that I ran for office. I felt as a young person who was trying very hard to save to buy my first house, the rate that the property taxes were increasing, I wasn't going to be able to afford. If it, property taxes were on track in Austin to double every 9 years, and that, of course, is completely out of line with people's ability to pay. 8% year over year. I don't know anybody who is getting an 8% pay raise every single year, yet that's what the city of Austin was getting. And I really felt like it was undermining the soul of our city. I mean, we love the culture here and we love the music here. And that's what kind of helps to keep Austin weird. And yet it's the artists, it's the musicians, it's the longtime residents who are being pushed out of the city because they cannot afford to keep up with the property taxes. So, I did a couple of things on city council, including passing a homestead exemption, which gives you a bit of a break on the home that you live in, which will go a long way to try to reduce that bill. But long story short, the frustrating thing is that the government, unlike a business, they don't have to really balance their revenue and their expenses. It's not like they have to sell more product or sell more food like a store or a restaurant would in order to cover increasing expenses. All they do is raise the tax rate and bring in more money every single year. There is a kind of a lack of efficiency and transparency in that process, which is really concerning. While I served 4 years on the city council and did as much as I could on that level, it has been really rewarding to work with TPPF and James at the state level on statewide property tax reform that I'm, hopefully will have an impact this year, but will have a lasting impact for years to come.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. James, what has been the process for determining property taxes before this last legislative session? Just kind of give an overview about where we were at then, and then we can talk some more about SB 2, Senate Bill 2.
Sure, it's a fundamentally broken system. Real quick, before we get to that point, I want to just put a little bit more detail behind this number here, because I think there might be a question or two directed at it. If folks want to go to the Travis County's website and just enter in the search term budget, what you'll find is a document that looks like this. And what you'll see is a breakdown of that $8,500 figure that shows about 55% of that number is the result of school district property tax levies. You've got about 20% that is attributable to your city government. Another 15% is the result of Travis County itself. And then the remainder is all of your special districts. Going back to the old system and what it did, why it was broken, at least in my opinion, was it allowed taxing units to increase their tax revenues by as much as 8% before voters could weigh in. And the mechanism that voters had to weigh in was a petition process, which was very onerous. And in my opinion, it put the emphasis on the wrong party, right? It asked voters to mobilize, get together, expend a lot of time and energy to fight against excessive property taxes. And so you had this 8% allowable increase before voters could weigh in. And then when they could weigh in, again, it was a petition process. So what we did was we attacked those two elements in the last legislative session. And Ellen did and you, Dr. Ginn, did some terrific work to really not only reduce that 8% figure, but fundamentally change what happens if a taxing unit wants to exceed that threshold.
Yeah. And what was interesting about that is that 8% was put in place, decades ago, whenever inflation was running at a much higher rate. During the 70s, we had double-digit rates of inflation. And at that time, when you had this change, that seemed like it was going to be within even inflation, much less population growth. And I know that, House Ways and Means Chairman Dustin Burrows and Senate Property Tax Committee Chairman Paul Betancourt, both of them mentioned that within their committees. Hey, look, this is archaic now. This is way back in the day, but population and inflation, just inflation alone, is usually running about 2%, right? And population growth, maybe another 1 or 2%. And so we need to get something that's back in line with what the initial reason for having this rollback rate was in general. And so, Ellen, would you mind helping expand on this a little bit more, like what Senate Bill 2 really did?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's pretty landmark legislation. It's as you said, the previous kind of rate was put in place at the end of the 80s. So now it's been many, many years and it's long overdue. And it's been a couple sessions in the making as well, where we're lucky to have a couple of really great property tax champions leading both the House and the Senate committees, and a governor and a lieutenant governor who were very supportive of these changes to bring us some relief. But ultimately, that 8% maximum rate was dropped down to 3.5%. And this is much more reasonable. It kind of allows local governments to still bring in 3.5% more revenue than they did before, plus new development, property taxes from newly developed property, to keep up with the growth in the city, but not so excessive as to tax people out of their homes. And another really great thing that it does, it changed that petition process. So it's an automatic trigger. If they go over 3.5%, there is automatically an election. So it eliminated that petition process that would have been very difficult to overcome. And of course, there were a lot of other transparency measures that went along with that bill. It was an amazing step in the right direction. And it was supposed to go into place this year. It does go into place this year. Unfortunately, we may not see the benefits of this new bill because of the COVID crisis. There was a provision in the bill that allowed for an exemption during a natural disaster. And our legislators were thinking, well, what happens if you have Hurricane Harvey hit again, and you have a city that has infrastructure to rebuild and a lot of just expenses that come from total destruction and a natural disaster. And so there was an exemption saying, well, if the natural disaster happens, you can go back up to that 8% just to allow you to recover. Unfortunately, a lot of our local elected officials, including in Austin, are using that provision to say, well, COVID is a disaster as well. And instead of sticking to that 3.5% rate and finally giving taxpayers some relief this year, they are looking at going back up to that maximum of 8%. And if they're successful, they could do it not only this year, but next year too.
Yeah.
And that's an important point, Ellen, because I believe if I've read the Austin American Statesman correctly, both the city of Austin and Travis County both are considering increasing their tax revenues up to 8% in these coming months.
Right. Yep. And it's unfortunate because this is a time when people are struggling. I mean, it's not only are we dealing with a health crisis, but it's an economic crisis too. I mean, you guys know how there are tons of people who have lost their jobs or have been furloughed, and we're trying to rebuild, but the city should be in the same boat as us. Normal families don't just get to turn around and say, well, but you can give me an 8% raise, right? And the city shouldn't be able to do that either. And we're seeing some really responsible leadership on this front from people like Mayor Eric Johnson in Dallas. And he's saying, yeah, we're going to tighten our belts just like the rest of our families have had to do in Dallas. And we're going to go through line by line and cut where we need to and find efficiencies where we need to. But unfortunately, we're not seeing that same leadership in Austin, and they are kind of already putting together a budget that is going to have major sticker shock at a time when people can least afford it.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. I mean, you're right. The unemployment rate is in double digits now here in Austin, across the state. And whenever they're already struggling financially, trying to raise their taxes just increases their cost.
Right.
And some would say, okay, that's just maybe a few dollars, $100 here and there. Well, those all add up. Every dollar matters to Texas families, whether they're in Austin, whether they're in Lubbock or Houston or anywhere else. We've really got to consider what they're going through. And it really shows this kind of disconnect between what the government is doing and what families are feeling at home. And whenever we're having to tighten our belts at home, we would hope that our government, our officials, are doing something very similar as they're being good stewards of our tax dollars. If you would, those from the audience, keep putting in your great questions overall. We have another question here about California's, and others have like Proposition 13. And Ellen, you mentioned this earlier about the appraisals. Is there something that we could do for make it more affordable for retirement?
I mean, there are some senior tax exemptions that where your school taxes are frozen once you reach the age of 65, and you get some breaks here and there. James, do you want to jump in and talk about kind of any other efforts on the TPPF front as far as?
Sure. Yeah, no, sure. So, I do want to put a fine point on something you said earlier about, there being a lot of money in the system. I went back because I'm a nerd like this, I went back through the Texas Controller's Rates and Levies website, which I encourage all of our audience to do. Go see the data for yourself and make your own determination. But I went back through and I looked at the big three here in Austin, the city, the county, and the school district, to measure its property tax levy growth from 2014 to 2018, so a 5-year period, and then match that up with population and inflation growth. In the case of the school district, I use enrollment growth. And what I found is that there's a huge discrepancy between how fast taxes are growing and how fast taxes should be growing. Mm-hmm. I just want to throw some numbers at you real quick. And again, anybody can do this using the Texas Controller's Rates and Levies website in conjunction with the BLS, the Census Bureau, and the TEA's data. So for the city of Austin, for that 5-year period, their property tax burden grew by 41%, and population and inflation only grew 13%. Wow. Huge mismatch there. For Travis County, it was a little better. The levies grew by 22%, and population inflation grew by 14%. And this was the big one. For Austin ISD, for that 5-year period, their property tax levy grew 56%. And enrollment and inflation in this case grew 0.7%. 0.7. And part of the reason for that is that you're seeing huge enrollment declines. The tax situation in Austin is forcing families to flee for the hills. Folks can't afford to live here anymore, right? And so I think that has a huge contribution or downward push on the enrollment and inflation component of that. So taxes are absolutely out of control in Travis County. And we need some big moves at the legislature next session.
Yeah, and I mean, that does hit those who are retirees even more, because their wage growth, their salary growth, Social Security or whatever else it may be, isn't growing at the same rate as in the private sector, right? Mm-hmm. So if we measure population growth and inflation, which collectively, sum those up, you get a good measure for the average taxpayer's ability to pay, because you have more people. You also have inflation is tied to wage growth, but that's not necessarily the case for seniors, right? And there are measures in place on some exemptions for school districts and things of that nature that help retirees. But it seems like if we're able to find a way to lower property taxes really for everyone and make sure they don't increase at a rapid rate, that will also, of course, help seniors in the process. One of the things that was interesting with the more transparency out of Senate Bill 2 last session was this idea of, instead of calling it the effective tax rate, to call it the no new revenue tax rate. Right. I wonder if there may be a good reason, as I've seen some questions here from the audience, should property owners be pushing for the no new revenue tax rate now?
At a minimum, our taxing units, everyone across the board, should be adopting the no new revenue tax rate. We're facing a period of very high unemployment. Families are hurting, businesses are closing. The least that government can do is to maintain a flat line on its revenues. Mm-hmm. What they ought to be doing, though, in truth, and I hope everybody in the audience will talk to their local officials about this, is to reduce the tax burden. Let's bring those tax rates way down and actually bring government more in line with today's economic realities.
And I want to just underscore, when you say no new tax rate, that doesn't mean that the city doesn't get any more dollars. It means because it's from their existing tax base. So if there's new development, so like in the city of Austin, we have a ton of new development, right? That vacant land downtown or in East Austin that was only being taxed as a vacant piece of property that now has a high-rise condo on it, the taxes went up a lot on that piece of property. So that revenue is on top of kind of the same amount of revenue that they've gotten before. So I hear people say, well, there's so many new people moving here, we need to raise taxes to accommodate for that. But no, the no new tax rate just keeps taxes steady for kind of existing residents, and it adds new people who are moving there. They're paying kind of new taxes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ellen. Thank you for bringing that up. One of the things, we have another question about how do property tax rates affect renters, right? There's a good report out by the Texas Comptroller, another Comptroller report, James, tax exemptions and tax incidents report, where you can go through and look at each one of the taxes that is currently collected by the state or the local level or at the local level. And remember, property taxes are only collected at the local level. It's not a statewide property tax. It's actually unconstitutional to have a statewide property tax in Texas. But it actually shows that, look, a lot of the taxes that are paid on school M&O, maintenance and operation property taxes in particular, are paid by businesses, around half. Around half are paid by individuals. And then it even breaks it down to the renter level as well, because we know that renters paid for part of that because the landlord just passes that on to those renters. I wonder, James, how can we get a better picture of what the true cost is to property taxes across the state? I mean, is it really good for us to just look at the taxes that we pay, or maybe should we be looking at the budget and finding ways of where they're spending those dollars?
Yeah, you're right on a couple of different pieces of that. So there is a very common misperception that renters do not pay property taxes. That's absolutely and totally inaccurate. Renters do pay property taxes. They just don't see it because it's embedded within their monthly rent. To your point about spending, that is actually at the heart of the problem here. As much as I think can be done on the tax front, ultimately the true solution to this problem lies in spending reform. I've lived in Austin long enough now to know just what kind of crazy things our city, county, and school district governments spend money on. And I can tell you, there is a lot of room for efficiency. Just want to run down a couple of my favorites that I've seen this year. In February, KXAN reported that the city of Austin spent $155,000 on Christmas parties. That was up from $140,000 from the prior year, right? Then in May, the city of Austin reportedly spent $2 million on about 290 rooms at the Crown Plaza to house homeless people affected by the coronavirus. You also had a report that, and I'm going to steal Ellen's thunder here, in 2018, and I learned this from watching her testimony during the last legislative session. In 2018, the city of Austin spent a grand total of, I believe it was $775,000 on a 5-year contract to clean one downtown public toilet. And of course, those are proliferated, so I'm sure those costs are way up. At the end of the day, we have to get a handle on spending to have any meaningful impact on taxes.
Right.
Yeah, so Ellen, I mean, what's up with this $10 billion transportation bond? I mean, surely that's going to lower our taxes, right?
Oh man, no, that is, yeah, your taxes are going to skyrocket. There is a transportation bond that will be on the November ballot that is going to ask us to pay for a massive rail system that, of course, is only going to serve a small portion of the population. It's going to be incredibly expensive. Actually, I need to do the math, but I'm pretty sure that it would be cheaper for us to give ride sharing vouchers to everybody in the city to actually get to where they want to go, rather than pay per ride to be on an incredibly expensive and inefficient rail transit system. So yeah, that's going to add a few $1,000s over the course of the building of that system to your property tax bill. And it's outdated technology that is likely in the 10 or 20 years that it's going to take us to build it. I don't even know if it's going to be really a technology that was worth investing in, or it seems like we're on the brink of a new transportation technology. And I would really like to see us spend our money on that. And again, the city kind of talks about wanting to support communities that are less fortunate, and minority communities, but it's like those are the people who are being taxed out of their homes, who aren't going to have who aren't commuting to downtown jobs and don't need a shiny new rail car to do it. And so it's incredibly unfortunate. And I want to add to James's earlier point about the spending. It's the things that he mentioned, the porta potties and the one-off expenses, the Christmas parties. Those are the glaring things that if you look at the city budget and you see a line item for, cleaning one porta potty for $700 and some $1,000, you're going to ask questions about that. But it's the other things that are absolutely embedded in the budget that you really need an audit to uncover. For example, the city of Austin buys new vehicles, all new city vehicles every 3 years. I mean, I don't get a new car every 3 years. I don't know why it would be necessary for the city to buy new cars every 3 years. And they're incredibly expensive and they buy them brand new. And then they do things like perform basic maintenance, oil changes, et cetera, in-house instead of outsourcing that. So while I was on council, I chaired the Audit and Finance Committee, and we had audit after audit after audit that said, these things are costing taxpayers a lot of money on just outsourcing the oil changes would save us up between 60 and 70% on that line item. So it's not something that jumps out at you from a budget document. It's something that we really need an audit to uncover. We have a city auditor, of course, but her office is very small and they only do very specific programmatic audits. They don't have the capability to do a large system-wide audit that will help us uncover where we're duplicating services and things like that. So, it's just hard for me when I hear people say, well, we need to increase taxes because we need better cities. If you support higher taxes, it means that you want better city services. And that hasn't been the case. I mean, the statistics that James threw out that property taxes have increased 41%, population and inflation haven't only increased 14%. I do not think that most people would say, well, city services have gotten that much better in that short amount of time. It's just not the case. And then in COVID, we have some city services that were completely non-existent. We have an animal shelter who is literally telling people who are bringing stray dogs to them to just take the dogs back to where they found them because they aren't allowing people into the shelter. You have building requirements and inspectors, things like that, who weren't working. You have council offices who aren't going into actual council offices. So you turn around and say, well, am I going to be prorated? Are my taxes going to be prorated for the services that I haven't been provided during that time? And of course, the answer is no. So, I hate to be too negative, but it is incredibly frustrating when you really get down into it. And I know we have some solutions too that TPPF will be working on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're both hitting on the correct point here, where we don't have a tax receipts problem, we have a spending problem.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Which is at every level of government overall. Over the last year, I had the fortunate opportunity to work at the White House as the Associate Director for Economic Policy at the Office of Management and Budget, and got to see, even on a larger scale, a lot of the fat, if you will, within the federal budget. And, the federal budget's been expanding quite a bit. Texas has received some of that money from the CARES Act. In particular, at the local level, local governments across the state have received $3.1 billion, which portion of that, of course, will go to to Austin, city of Austin, Travis County, things of that nature, expanding how much money they have to spend on certain items. And so I think it will be very important for us to be able to take a deep dive into every one of these dollars spent. James, you were making some good points earlier about before we went on our webinar about virtue signaling. That I think is something it's key to thinking about right now, because we saw a lot of people last session. Both of you remember this. When we would line up to testify for Senate Bill 2, for example, who was there to testify against it? Pretty much every local official, for the most part, saying that they would have to cut money on police. They would have to cut money for X, Y, and Z along the way. But now we are getting a different sort of attitude by many of our local officials. James, would you mind enlightening us on some of this?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah,
we could go in a lot of different directions. I'll say, during the last legislative session, the primary opponents to tax reform were city officials, their taxpayer-funded associations, and taxpayer-funded lobbyists themselves. Those were the three primary groups of people that came out to argue against taxpayers. And again, to emphasize your point, the lead argument they used was that if conservatives were successful in moving forward with this 3.5% trigger, then public safety was going to be decimated. And the irony of ironies that we find ourselves in today is that the city of Austin and other large liberal areas are defunding police on their own because of pressure from the left, right? And so I think it just goes to show what a disingenuous argument it was during the last legislative session. All of us know that there's plenty of money in the budget, even with the 3.5% revenue trigger in place. They have a lot of areas that they can do better on and shift funds around. Something else that isn't lost on me, and I hope the city and the county prove me wrong on this point. I really do. But just a few weeks ago, the city of Austin spent about $30,000 on yellow paint to put on downtown Congress Avenue, Black Austin Matters, right? But when I look at their policies, when I look at the things they're doing, I really question whether they stand behind that statement. Because you look at property taxes that are pushing low income and minority families out of town. You look at the school system, which locks in those same folks into failing schools. You look at the lack of affordable housing. I truly question whether Travis County and the city of Austin do believe that Black Austin matters, or whether they're just all talk.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Milton Friedman, who's one of my favorite economists, he always said, don't judge a policy by its intentions, but by its results. And what we're finding is that those results are not whatever they may have intended initially, are not heading them in the right direction. Ellen, do you have anything to add on to that?
No, I mean, I think he absolutely hit the nail on the head. It's, and we're going to see the same thing, not to get too deep into the COVID discussion, but we're going to see the same thing with another COVID lockdown. The mayor and the council are meeting tomorrow to talk about a 35-day lockdown in the city of Austin, which of course would be directly in opposition to the governor's orders that allowed reopening. And despite the fact there is zero evidence that lockdowns have been successful in containing the virus. We've had states that have locked down much sooner and much harder than Texas that have seen much more widespread, despite the fact that, people who are not seniors and don't have pre-existing conditions are virtually 0% at risk of dying from this disease. Despite all of that data, he's still looking at locking down the city again. And then he's going to turn around and say, well, we suffered such great property tax or sales tax loss because I mean, because we were locked down. So they are going to create a situation where not only are they not doing any good to keep the virus from spreading, but they also are going to bring in less revenue to the city if none of us are out there shopping and supporting restaurants. Meanwhile, minority businesses are going to go out of business. And so it's just, they're creating these situations and perpetuating them, and then kind of turning around and finger pointing and saying that they can't possibly survive without a major tax increase. And it's incredibly frustrating.
No, it really is. And we had another, someone else who was mentioning about the no new tax revenue rate, and actually that we should be demanding lower tax rates overall. And really, when not only lower tax rates, but such that your property taxes go down.
Right.
Right. Because then you have to think about your appraisal times that property tax rate overall. And so, I think we've highlighted a lot of the problems,
right?
Because there are a lot. We could spend more than an hour doing that, but we have about 20 minutes left. We're continuing to get in some good questions. So thank you, audience members, for sending those in. Please continue to do so. I'd like to get into some more of the solutions. How do we solve this problem? That's why here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, we're not just a think tank, we are a do tank. We are trying to get things done for Texans and really ultimately for all Americans, as we set the stage for what other states and localities should do. So with that, not too much pressure, James, let's start off with you. What would be a couple of your key solutions that we should be looking at going into the 2021 legislative session that begins in January?
Sure. So because the city of Austin and Travis County and others are looking at possibly circumventing the reforms that we were able to put in place during the last session, we've been working with our friends at the legislature to really examine what can be done to penalize those jurisdictions who maybe aren't keeping taxpayers in mind. And I got to give it to Chairman Betancourt and Chairman Burrows. Both had an excellent idea that's kind of taken root and grown quite a bit. The idea that they're currently pitching is that for a jurisdiction like the city of Austin, if they don't observe that 3.5% trigger and they decide to go it on their own, that in the next legislative session, conservatives are going to do their best to pass legislation that penalizes folks like Austin who do not observe SB2, and in future years, they will be forced to bring their rates down to account for the excessive increase that they're entertaining right now. I think that's a great idea. It should definitely be a shot across the bow for folks like Austin and Travis County who are entertaining that idea. So in addition to that, what I'd also like to see done is zero-based budgeting at the local government level. And zero-based budgeting really is just a fancy way of saying start your budget from scratch, right? Oftentimes what you have at the local level is a current services model where your elected officials will take last year's budget number, tack on a certain percentage, and move forward. And as we've seen in places like Austin and Travis County, that can lead to a huge amount of government waste, fraud, and abuse that accrues in the system. I think there's a lot of potential to require every political subdivision to undergo periodic zero-based budgeting. It'd be a great way to eliminate the waste, fraud, and abuse. And then the last one that I want to put on your radar, and I think Ellen can speak to this quite a bit, is the use of efficiency audits. Of course, the three of us remember just a few years ago when the city of Austin did their best and actually succeeded in squashing an efficiency audit requirement where we would have an outside third party come on in and just check under the hood. We wanted to see, is the money that we're spending producing the kind of outcomes that we think it ought to? And of course, the mayor, city council members, and some of the local unions were unfortunately able to quash that. But I want to take that idea to the legislative, to a legislative setting, and see if we can expand that out to encompass not only Austin, but also every big city and every big county. I think especially with the amount of federal aid that's flowing through the system right now, We need to have some outside eyes take a look at the budget and operations for our large liberal friends and really put out some good information so that folks can have confidence that their governments are operating efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't want to know how you can do things better. I just think that is such a basic no-brainer, but unfortunately it's taken a little bit of encouragement to get people on board. I want to add a few more things that we can do to support lower property taxes going forward. The first is we need to close, it's not really a loophole, but it is something that was ultimately left out of Senate Bill 2, despite efforts by the senator and representative who supported the bills, which is certificates of obligation. And that is a big word that basically just means non-voter approved debt. So there's voter approved debt that gets put on the ballot, like the transportation bond that we were just discussing. But most taxing entities also have the authority to issue, in certain circumstances, non-voter approved debt. So that's just something that passes through the council, never gets a say on the voters, but is ultimately going to impact your tax bills. Certificates of obligation need to be included in Senate Bill 2 and in those property tax reforms that we pass, because ultimately it's all coming out of the same pocket, right? Yours and mine. Also, of course, you can email your local leaders and tell them that you support the no new revenue tax rate or that you are demanding lower taxes, but even better, run for office, right? If you're not happy with things, the decisions that local leaders are making, you need to step up and run for office yourself. We need good people to do it. And some of those good people are going to be on the ballot this fall. You should, if you're not running for office yourself, you need to consider supporting candidates and organizations like TPPF that are furthering these causes. I mean, it's one thing, I have heartburn sometimes when I tell people, hey, go to your city council members need to hear from you, go to the meetings. Well, those meetings are 12 hours long and they're going to last all day and you're going to get 3 minutes and they're probably going to ignore you anyway. So not that that's reason not to do it, still make those phone calls, still make those emails, still go to those meetings if you can. But the easier way to do it is to support people who are going to support these reforms. And so I would just encourage everybody to really be knowledgeable about what's going on in our elections right now. There's a runoff election happening as we speak. Early voting is going on this week. So you can look up on, I think it's votetexas.org. Somebody can correct me and see who's on your ballot, learn a little bit about them and make sure, that you're casting those votes.
Hey, Ellen.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a small controversy just a few years ago involving Travis County and its use of certificates of obligation? Do you recall that?
Are you talking about the library, the downtown library?
The $329 million courthouse.
The courthouse. Yeah. Travis County.
There's so many. It's hard to keep up.
Exactly. Well, the library has been on my mind because, of course, I have 3 young kids. I have 3 kids under 4, and we are dying. They've been quarantined for 4 months. And I'm like, man, this library that we spent $120 million on is not open, right? I mean, so I can't believe that that we're paying for all these services and not going to get a rebate. But yes, you're right. The Travis County put something on the ballot to build a new courthouse, and it was defeated. And so they said, well, hey, the voters didn't really want this tax increase and they didn't really think that this was important. So instead, we're just going to pay for it with certificates of obligation so that we still spend the money and we still get their taxes raised, but they don't get a say in it. So it's that kind of disingenuous thing that's going on that's really driving our taxes up. In addition to the big things that are on the ballots.
Yeah, this is all great. I also wanted to say bless you for 3 kids under 4. I didn't realize that. So, man, that's something else.
I had 2 of those kids while on the Austin City Council. So,
that's right. Yeah.
So yeah, and a third after I got off. So it is possible to serve and have kids. You just gotta. It's hard, but someone's got to do it.
Amen. Well, these all are very good solutions overall, and I hope will continue to be looked at during the current interim that we're in and going into the next session. One of the things that we've been looking at the foundation for a long time, even, my mentor, the Honorable Talmadge Heflin, has been looking at this for years, if not decades, really, of about, eliminating property taxes. And I wonder if, James, if you might give us some ideas of why that might be a good thing.
Yeah, no, I think we have a lot of great solutions in the short term and in the intermediate, but the ultimate long-term solution is to eliminate the property tax system entirely so that people can actually own their own home and they're not renting from the government, because ultimately at the end of the day, if you don't pay your tax bill, your Texas government is going to take away your home. So, one of the ideas that we've long held out there as a solution is moving away from the property tax system entirely and transitioning to a consumption-based model. And there's some great research out there from you, Dr. Ginn, as well as Dr. Arthur Laffer, putting forward some economic modeling that details what exactly a switch like that would look like, what your tax rate would have to be, what your tax base could potentially be. I don't think that there is any reason to think that solution is unworkable. Really, it's a question of political will in my mind. And for anybody who's interested in learning more about it, we've got a lot of really great research at texaspolicy.com putting that out there in larger detail. The second one that, because I know for some, that concept may be too much of a paradigm shift, even though I think it's absolutely needed. What we did is we took a little bit more of an intermediate approach in the last legislative session and put forward, I think, a really a great plan that gets us part of the way there. And what that plan does is it effectively modifies the existing state spending limit, which is based on personal income, and it brings it down to population and inflation. And over time, what you see is a delta begins to grow from where that spending limit was to where it is now. And our idea was to apply that surplus down to your school district M&O tax. And over a period of time, which I believe was 12 years, we could effectively buy out your school district M&O property tax entirely. And that, by doing that, you actually get a couple of different things. One, you're actually controlling the rate of state spending growth in a much healthier way. Two, you're providing immediate and lasting tax relief, because for most of us, the school district M&O tax rate is about between 25 and 33% of your overall tax bill. It's a pretty healthy chunk. And then you're also addressing the Robin Hood problem, which is, of course, I think a really bad system that everyone wants to do away with. So that one plan alone solves three major issues and also gives people tax relief in a big, big way.
Yeah, I think those are really important, right? Eliminating property taxes, finding a way either through what you call a swap, swapping it for a reformed, more efficient sales tax system, or find this way where you're using the excess tax receipts essentially to buy down that property tax over time. And that would be a more immediate sort of relief to property tax owners across the state, where we can find a way to actually own your own home. So, Ellen, do you have anything else you'd like to add along those points?
Oh no, I'm just sitting here thinking, I'm so glad that you two are on top of all this data and research. I'm going to help you advocate at the state level when the legislature is back in town in 2021. But I'm just so grateful that we have you guys going through all those reports and coming up with those great ideas, because it sounds like that would be a transformational shift that would really, really be something that a more sustainable system and have a lot of benefits going forward.
And to that point, Ellen, let me encourage my friends on the right. If you look at what's happening on the left today with their calls to defund police and their calls to tear down the political environment and the economy altogether. The left is going big. And I want to challenge my friends on the right to also go big. You know, we have a great opportunity to really reshape the environment in the next legislative session. And I hope we go for home run after home run, because the left is going to do the same regardless of how crazy we think they are.
Yeah. Now, that's a great point, because going into this session, as I mentioned earlier, Congress, with all their wisdom, has sent us, $11.4 billion as a whole, 3.1 billion of that to local levels, but you still have $8.3 billion that's going to the state. And what we've got to be careful about for the Texas Legislature is that we don't put that all in as ongoing tax receipts. Mm-hmm. We've seen what happened with that back when the American Recovery Reinvestment Act under the Obama administration was sent a lot of money to Texas, for example, for education. And then the next election cycle or next legislative session, there was all these arguments that that the state was cutting the amount to education, when really it was just that the federal money went away. But the state money, if you look even in real terms, adjusted for inflation, it still stayed flat. And so I think we could see some of these sort of arguments come up again if we're not careful, because really it's not about the taxes and the funds that are flowing in. It's really about the spending. And we have a great opportunity here for the legislature, for local officials on the property tax side, to really help out struggling Texas families all across this great state. So we've only got about 5 minutes left. Ellen, I want to give you the last word. So James, what would you like to say in a couple of minutes to finish this off?
Sure. Well, so the city of Austin's loss is our tremendous gain. I can't tell you what a joy it has been working with Ellen, watching her success. She's a big reason why Senate Bill 2 got passed last session in a relatively purple body. So I can't wait to see what magic she works next session. I know my wife is really excited about all the good things you're going to do. Our family definitely needs it, because we too are suffering from skyrocketing tax bills. Yeah. In addition to that, I think at the end of the day, I hope that one of the takeaways that the audience walks away with is that right now is the time to engage in the process. You have a lot of things unfolding in the local public finance arena right now. Your city, county officials are looking at their budgets. Soon they're going to be adopting their tax rates. Now is the time to speak to them directly. Let them know about your situation, about what kind of pressure you're under, and what a benefit it would be if we were somehow, at least at a minimum, able to adopt that no new tax revenue rate, or ideally bring taxes down entirely.
Yeah, good point, James. Ellen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my takeaway is something that I knew before, but how grateful I am that even though we are in the blueberry and the tomato soup, as Rick Perry has always called Austin, Texas, but how grateful I am that we do live in a state where we have a legislature that has been able to be responsive for the most part to our cries for help on this property tax issue. And there's a big election coming up, and we'll see how that plays out. But I'm really hopeful that people not only engage, as James said, by getting in touch with their local elected officials, their city council and county commissioners right now as they're going through their budget process, but also make sure that, they're making their voices heard at the polls in November, and then helping us advocate when the session begins in January. I want to make sure that if you had a question that didn't get answered, feel free to get in touch with us. All three of us are on Twitter. You can get a hold of me, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, email. It's at Ellen Troxclair. So I'm happy to answer any other questions there. And of course, we'll be tweeting out relevant data and things as we work through these issues. And if you are inspired by this conversation and want to learn more about how you can make an impact, this is part of what I wrote about in my book called Step Up, How to Advocate Like a Woman. I talk about kind of my journey to, private citizen to public official, how that all happened, and how you can do it too, and the most effective ways to be involved. So you can pick that up on Amazon or anywhere books are sold.
Thank you so much, Ellen. And thank you, James. And thank you, audience for being here with us today. We're going to be respectful of your time that you've taken out of your day so that you continue to be productive. And I think hopefully you've learned something along the way. I know I have, and I just really appreciate the time here today with Ellen Troxclair and James Quintero. Again, I'm Vance Ginn, and as Ellen said, you can find our information on social media. You can find more information about the reports and the research that we've talked about today at texaspolicy.com. And we'd love to hear from you anytime. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for being here. And until next time, have a wonderful day.